are on location at the Catholic Marketing Network here in Somerset, New Jersey, shooting on-location bookmarks with some of the authors here visiting at the various publishers. And on set, joining me right now, is Dr. Frederick W. Marks. Think and Believe is the name of his book, and it's great to have here, Doctor.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's the first time we've met in person. I've seen a couple of your books over the years from Emmaus. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, my background started out very early on. My father was not a Catholic. He was very brilliant and was not against religion, but he wasn't a Catholic, was interested in the faith. And my mother was an articulate Catholic, and the questions just went buzzing back and forth over the dinner table, you know, for years. I was fascinated. My father would shoot these questions at my mother and so on, and she would stand her ground. And after 20 years it took my dad, he became a Catholic. So that's the background that I brought to Holy Cross College when I entered in 1958. And there the Jesuits would be on the floor with the students. And night and day, you could ask those Jesuits any question about the faith you wanted. Coming from my house, I had lots of questions, and I got great answers for all of them. So I emerged from Holy Cross with a very strongly, very well-grounded faith, you know. And I went into the field of history. I taught at a Catholic high school for a year, and then I did graduate work in history. Taught at Purdue University, St. John's University in the field of history. And then in the 60s and 70s, I could see this vacuum developing in faith formation. And apologetics was sort of fading, and people were not as interested in learning about their faith. They were more interested in learning about other people's faiths, the age of ecumenism. And I felt, gee, I mean, maybe I have a contribution that I could make and should make at this particular point. So I switched from history, which didn't serve me badly, because a PhD in history gives you a good sense for what's authentic and what isn't authentic in terms of sources, in which the Bible is one of the greatest sources, you know.
You talk about that in the book.
I talk about this in the book, yeah. And so I came into religion from history, and today I'm a street evangelist with the Catholic Evidence Guild of New York.
Okay, so the Catholic Evidence Guild, that rings a bell, and that's Frank Sheed, right?
Yeah, he started all of that. Maisie Ward and Frank Sheed. It started in England. It came to the States in 1928. And Cardinal O'Connor and Father Groeschel, they were part of that in the early days, you know. And it's under the aegis of the New York Archdiocese, our particular division. And we go to the parks, and we go to Grand Central Terminal, and we set up a table.
You're literally a street evangelist.
We're literally a street evangelist.
So what do you do? I mean, how do they decide where you're going to go? And they say go here this week, or you decide where you're going to go, and then when you go there, you just stand on a street corner and yell things out, or what do you do?
Well, we decide, we try this and we try that. We try to go to places where it's going to be most receptive, where we're going to get the most, you know, customers.
You mean on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral or something?
No. Grand Central Terminal, Union Square, Washington Square Park, and places like that.
A lot of interesting people hang out in some of those parks.
Oh boy, yeah. We had a guy who was doing sword play next to us one time, and he was sort of gumming up the communications a little bit. He was cutting these apples in half with his swords and so on, and it took me a while to engage him, you know, in the conversation. And so we could talk, you know, but we give talks and we hand out information and we answer gazillion questions from ex-Catholics and atheists.
When you're out there doing that kind of street evangelization, is there one or two questions you get asked the most?
Well, I would say it's a very good range of questions that we get asked. We have to be prepared for almost anything. But the thing is, regardless of what the questions are that we get, we always have a good relationship with the people that come by, because they are willing to spend time with us talking religion, which is something that the average person on the street is not basically interested in. We have thousands of people indifferent that go by all the time. We get an atheist in there, or an ex-Catholic, or somebody like that. Well, we think, oh, that's wonderful. They're interested in religion, you know. And
I wonder, maybe there are a lot more of those people who are interested in religion too, but they are not willing to risk to engage in a conversation, because I think the reality is it's there so much in the culture. Everybody's searching in one way or the other, right? Oh,
sure. Deep down, everybody's searching. And if you get deep down enough with a lot of these people who are hostile to the faith or very, very difficult to get to, you frequently find there's some kind of a moral issue at the root of these difficulties. It could be fornication, it could be contraception, it could be same-sex activity, it could be a whole slew of things, divorce and remarriage. But that often is what's at the base of the difficulty of communication, because it sets up a wall there, basically. And Conversion, of course, is usually 10, 20, 30 years for most people. It's not going to happen in a trice like that, you know. But we love this work, you know, and we feel that we are planting seeds, whoever the people are.
It's really preaching the truth in love. And it's even like our new Holy Father, Father Francis, Pope Francis is big on that, a whole idea of our goal isn't to beat people up and to be aggressive. Our goal is to convert them, to show them the beauty of the faith, right? And when you don't want Pyrrhic victories where you can convince a person he's wrong and leave him decimated.
Absolutely. We do a lot of listening. We do a lot of listening, you know? And we let them talk it out, talk it out, talk it out, talk it out. You know, so ask me, some of them, you know, machine gun me with 50 questions. And I'll say, give me one of those questions and I'll answer it, you know, to your satisfaction, I hope. And,
do you think sometimes people don't want you to answer?
People don't.
They ask you a bunch of questions because they don't want you to really be able to answer.
Yes, they jump from one thing to another, to another, to another, and so on.
They want to be reinforced in their disbelief.
I had a couple of Protestant pastors who came by on one occasion, and after talking to them for about 40, 45 minutes, they said, let's meet at McDonald's or someplace and have talks afterwards. So in succeeding weeks, I spent about 7 hours with these pastors, and we felt that we had to set a clock. They got 5 minutes, and I got 5 minutes, and we would go back and forth, 5 minutes, and so on. And at the end of 7 hours, I mean, I think they knew a lot more about Catholic culture, Catholic history, and what Catholics really believe than they knew going in. I didn't expect them to necessarily fall down, you know, in front of me and say, you know, we really feel it. But we have terrific experiences on the street. And
we're looking for... It puts the idea in their mind, it gives them something to question about and certainly to think about, and at least they look at the Catholic Church in a different way.
Exactly.
At least a more enlightened way.
Exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the book. You dedicated to Mary. Now, is that your mother, or are we talking about the Blessed Mother?
Well, my mother was Mary Grace. My daughter is Mary Ann, but Mary is Mary. And she's our mother, and she's our queen. And so this is how she gets here.
Right. In the acknowledgments, you start off with, I take complete responsibility for any errors of detail or interpretation in the following essay, talking about this piece. But I'm gathering that comes out of your PhD in history, right? You've got to be accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, in the introduction here, it says, religion seldom comes up in casual conversation. Good taste dictates that we stick to sports and the weather. Now, why do you think that? Has it always been like that? Has it just become the way, I think even for Catholics in the American culture, that there was that concern about us fitting in, and so talking about our faith kind of ghettoized us?
Well, I think the reason that people find it more and more difficult over the years to talk about religion is because there are more and more moral issues that divide people. You know, back in the days when we had morality in common with our Protestant brethren and the Jewish brethren and other people and so on, it was much easier to talk religion, I think, than it is today, because today you're getting in very, very touchy subjects. Contraception and abortion and, well, divorce and remarriage. There was very little of that 50, 60 years ago. So it was easier to talk about religion because it was more theological, higher level, you know, than it is today. And it's
the kind of things that most people in their day-to-day life really didn't impact them.
It's very important. It's very important. And I think that more and more people hopefully will try to find segues into religious discussion with people. You know,
well, we have seen a rebirth of apologetics, certainly in Catholicism in the last 20 years or so, certainly with Catholic Answers and the Evidence Guild and that. So there seems to be that. Now you say in Think and Believe, challenges the reader to set aside long-held assumptions and prejudices. Which ones are those?
Well, they could be a whole set of ideas. For example, religion causes war.
Right, okay, you deal with that in the book. Right.
It could be something like as simple as that, or it could be, you know, Catholics are servile, intellectually servile. They follow a man in Rome, you know, that type of thing. I mean,
you've got the kind of the black legend stuff about the Crusades and the Inquisition and other things like that.
Right, exactly. You know, Galileo was this guy who was, you know, pulled down by the church because he was teaching that the Earth is not the center of the universe. You know, and
it's not a new idea necessarily that week either.
Right, exactly. But you know, I was reading the latest research on Galileo shows not only that he was teaching a theory as a fact, which is intellectually dishonest in any day or age, you know, and it wasn't a fact for 200 years thereafter. So the church had a right to pull him down on that particular point.
And go ahead, I'm sorry. You're the expert, you tell it.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, and it's also a lot because there was a certain crossover into how that impacted the Bible and things, and that's where the church had its concerns.
Well, that's what the underlying...
And he had made some promises about doing or not doing things as well.
In the statement that the commission finally printed against Galileo, the church commission came out with this idea that they said he was vehemently suspected of heresy. They didn't say he was a heretic, they said vehemently suspected of heresy. And that was really the issue with Galileo. The latest research shows that Galileo was not a Catholic, other than a cafeteria type Catholic. Rarely went to church. He didn't believe in miracles. He believed that nature and natural laws were would never fail in any situation. So he didn't believe in miracles, evidently. I mean, what does that say about his attitude toward the Bible, And that he was leading his students down the primrose path that way. And he called his own mother a whore, and I won't even talk about his personal life. But the idea here is that you have a man who's really a heretic, and in those days, heresy was tantamount to treason in all the countries in those days. You had to be in tune with the religion of the state, or you could be executed.
Right. And you talk about later in the book about how people were treated in different countries under different religious groups other than Catholics, where things didn't go so well, especially under secularists. And if we think about just the last century, look at the horrors of Nazism, the Soviet Union under Stalin, Mao Zedong, all of those kind of genocides. They didn't happen under Christian auspices.
No. The 20th century is the least religious century in history, and it's the bloodiest, the most cruel, and the most full of war of any century we've ever seen.
You have a statement here, and I remember this from Plato's Republic. 500 years before the birth of Christ, a character in Plato's Republic is quoted as having said, if a truly righteous man were ever to come along, he would be such a thorn in the side of society that would be subjected to every form of humiliation and eventually crucified. Sounded like a prediction, but that's what happened, right?
That's what happened. That's the statement. I thought it was kind of amazing that you get this out of Plato's Republic. It's exactly what happened. Somehow or other, the Lord was preparing these people for the coming of Jesus, evidently.
Now, you talk about different things that you talk about the case for God, and you talk about religion and war. And we talked about that a little bit before. You say that by nature, men are aggressive. History indicates they fight more viciously and more frequently without religion than with it. And I thought this was an interesting point you made. Why is it that the religious communities, such as the Franciscans, Benedictines, Dominicans, have been more successful at preserving harmony than secular utopias like Brook Farm and Fruitlands, whoever they were?
Yes. These were secular utopias in New England, and people were married, and they decided that they would live a perfect life together and so on in great harmony. But there was great dissension in those communities. It broke right out, and all kinds of things happened that made life very difficult. But yeah, I mean, Jesus said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And if the people of his country had taken that advice to heart,
you saw that as a statement to the Zealots.
Yeah, they never would have fought the Romans
out. Right.
They never would have fought the Romans. They never would have lost their temple or Jerusalem or any of these things and so on if they'd taken the great man of religion seriously and what he had to say about peace and war, what you should fight for and not fight for. Yeah, and I mean, look at the United States. We've been in 12 wars. Have any of them had anything to do with religion? Not that it's bad to fight for religion. I mean, people have fought for religion in the past, but so they fought for love, love, they fought for patriotism. We're not going to eliminate patriotism because it might cause a war.
But people have to remember there were lots of wars fought in Europe between two Christian countries, who technically, from a religious side, were exactly the same Catholic Church.
Absolutely, and there are cases in Europe where Catholics enlisted the aid of Muslims or Protestants to fight other Catholics.
Well, Othello in Shakespeare is a Muslim who's basically a mercenary fighting for a Christian king.
I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
That's what he is, right? And he also said, we shall see in chapter 8, this is later in the book, we talked about the Crusades, and this is so important. You make the point so well. The Crusades were primarily defensive. It was not until religious enthusiasm waned during the Renaissance that Europe imploded in the name of religion. And certainly you talk about the Crusades. That whole idea of what was the goal? The goal was to retake. What's wrong with understanding the word retake? The Holy Land. What happened to Christian North Africa? What happened to all those areas? They were overrun. They weren't given away. And the Crusades happened only as a response to aggressive actions by Islam, right?
Absolutely, and no effort was made to convert any of those Muslims who were conquered in the war. There was no effort, certainly no forced conversion, and proselytizing was not really part of the Crusades. It was, as you say, just an attempt basically to hold what was ours and to regain it in many cases, the safety of the pilgrims to Jerusalem and
Right, and I know you talk about even there, because we always hear about the horror of the massacre in Jerusalem where the blood was up to the ankles, and I don't want to play that down, that wasn't a horrific scene. But people need to understand, I mean, you talk about, who is it, the German pilgrims? Was it thousands of German pilgrims who were slaughtered?
Cut down, I mean, yeah, by the Muslims on their way on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And the bloodbath was part of the rules of war. You gave people who were in a fortified position the chance to surrender, all right? And you could promise them safety and security. But if they didn't surrender, the price you would pay for taking that fortified position was so bad, so terrific, that you had to basically go through with that slaughter.
And you needed that to be hung over the head of the next city.
Exactly.
They had to know that you meant what you were saying, that if we let you go, we'll let you go, and if you don't go, you're all going to die.
Exactly, yeah. You had to have that type of, your word had to mean something, yeah.
Right. Well, you say here in the section on page 124 about the Crusades, you talk about the pilgrim sites being raised, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You say by 1014, 30,000 other Christian churches had met a similar fate. In 1064, an unarmed group of German pilgrims numbering 7,000 were set upon, and about 2/3 of them died. You talk about all of the places in the Holy Land that were deconsecrated by the Muslims. And as you say, and there was one quote here from Omar Ibn al-Qarar Abu Bakr, successor in the Caliphate, and the father of the Muslim calendar, spoke for all Islam when he declared not long after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, "It behooves us to devour the Christians and their descendants as long as any of them remain on earth."
Yeah, sounds familiar.
Now, if we had said that on the other way around, that quote would be
we'd never hear the end of it.
Times Square.
Never hear the end of it, yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And you also talk about other atrocities, because you talk about, obviously, sometimes we hear about other places besides the Inquisition and burning witches and all these terrible things that were done. You talk about the French revolutionaries who killed over 100,000 men, women, and children in the Vendée, in the course of Vendée, and drowning of thousands at Pont-de-Mont. But it's interesting because there's a movie, like a documentary that was just done on this, with little kids playing the characters.
Yeah, I saw that.
That we're going to be airing. Jim Morlino, who did it, is actually here. And he's doing that, and we're actually talking about doing an adult version that'll be shot in France. So hopefully, but that's a story. I mean, who ever heard of that?
Whoever heard of the story, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But the atrocities have been terrible on the side of people without religion. You know, why should they be gentle? Why should they be merciful? Why should they treat people as, as made in the image of God? Right. They don't believe that, and so the atrocities of Hitler and Stalin and Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh and all of these people and so on are unlike any atrocities you'll find on a religious side of issues, particularly people.
When you talk to people, either there or even people on more an intellectual basis who might be in the academic sphere that you've been in, who have maybe a general Christian understanding, or they kind of view their faith as fitting into their liberal kind of view of the universe. When things like that come up, how do they dismiss them? Or do they dismiss them? Do they ignore them, or what?
Well, my experience is they simply jump on to the next question, because I don't think there is a refutation of that particular point, that the worst cruelties in history come from people who are irreligious or anti-religious, hostile. You see it in the Spanish Civil War. If you compare, you're going to get atrocities on both sides of any conflict, where people are fighting for life and death. You're going to get atrocities on both sides, but there's nothing like the atrocities of the atheist or a person who's hostile to religion. I mean, they will strip people naked, they will humiliate people. Look what Jesus had to suffer,
Well, it's interesting, too, because what happens with these things, it's all your perspective. You don't always understand. It's like, for the United States, the Republican side, which was basically the communist side in the Civil War, versus the quote-unquote fascist side, because obviously Spain was somewhat aligned with Hitler prior to the war, though they never went into the war, and it was really used as a testing ground between the Russians and the Nazis to some for equipment and stuff. But it was like the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. These are people fighting for freedom, and so that's the perspective we got, you know, of you know, whether it's through Hemingway or just the reports that happened in those days. You know, it was also very pro the Republican side.
Yes, it was filtered through American lenses.
Right.
And American lenses were not pro-Catholic lenses.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, you know, I always thought about it as a kid. I loved Errol Flynn movies, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And so I was always rooting when Captain Blood would be shooting the heck out of some ship called the Madre de Dios, and all those guys were going down to the bottom without ever stopping and thinking, that's Mary Mother of God, that's that shirt the name of the ship he's shooting. Sending to the, but you know what I mean? But it was so like the Spanish, the Inquisition, the dark side. The English, oh, they're standing up, they're fighting like we are, they're revolutionaries, they're just common men. So you see, it was even reinforced in our cinema in the great years of the cinema.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
You also talk about, with the Inquisition, you talk about fear of subversion by Jewish fifth column cannot be understood apart from two other facts. In 1472, the Reconquistador had yet to take back the southern Islamic-controlled portions of the country when the Inquisition got underway. People don't really realize that for a great many years, most of Spain, or a good part of Spain, was under Muslim control. In fact, they you know, if it wasn't for the Battle of Tours, all of Europe would have been under Muslim control. And the peninsula was therefore convulsed in civil war, and the Spanish feared they might wake up one day and find themselves under Sharia law. And so there had been this idea that people were agreeing to act like they were Catholic, but not really be Catholic. So could they really be trusted, right? And that's where the Inquisition would come into things like this. In my understanding, in many cases, first of all, there's different Inquisitions. There's local Inquisitions, and there's related directly to the Vatican. And also in almost all the courts, most people would much rather have been tried under the Inquisition and the church court, which was much more lenient than the regular courts were. Am I correct?
Very fair.
Right.
Right. And I try to make this point, Doug, you know, here where I say that they didn't go, the Spanish Inquisition did not go after Jews worshiping in synagogues, did not go after Muslims worshiping in their mosques. As you say, it went after people who were claiming to be Catholic, but who underneath were rooting for the other side, essentially, you know. And this is the fifth column.
And you do make that point, which I had never really thought of, which was the idea that even to some degree in the Crusades period, and let alone in Spain, that in many ways the Jewish people would have been more in favor, at least on the short term, of the Christians being pushed out.
Absolutely, because they had done very well under Muslim control of Spain. There were Jewish mayors of Seville and Cordoba and Granada. They were mayors of these cities under the Muslim control. They did very well together. They believed in one God, they don't have a trinity, they don't eat pork, and there are many other things that they have in common with the Muslims and so on. Yeah, and they did very well. And this is not to say that they couldn't do well under Christian auspices, because Isabella's, you know, had Jewish advisors. They helped to put her into power, and she had nothing against the Jews as a queen. She helped them wherever she could. She built synagogues for them and so on, you know, Isabella. But that's another story. But yes, there was a tendency, I think, on the part of the Jewish people to feel that they would prefer to live under Muslim aegis versus Christian aegis.
Now, in the conclusion, you say, in my work as a street evangelist, I am sometimes asked how it feels to be Catholic in a time when the American Catholic Church is at a low ebb spiritually. And you say no different.
The low ebb spiritually refers partly to the sex abuse scandals, all right? That's just the tip of the iceberg in some cases, you know, because there's been a lot of laxity in teaching in the Catholic Church.
Sure.
But when you look at a Rembrandt painting, you don't look at a spot on the lower right-hand corner and wonder whether, you know, how he got that on the canvas, or what was his intention, or putting the spot there or whatever. You look at the whole picture. I mean, you look at the picture of the Catholic Church, it's fabulous. I mean, the people who take the Catholic faith seriously soar like eagles, right? Mother Teresa of Calcutta, John Paul II, and Mother Angelica, and so on. You judge an institution by how the people behave who take it seriously, take their faith seriously. And Judas was one of 12. So what is that? Almost 10% of the original apostles.
Right.
And Jesus called him friend in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is a thief and a traitor.
Right.
He keeps him on. And you could just imagine the pundits the next day saying, how can you put your faith in a religion like this kind of laxity?
Or somebody could say, you know, how can he be so wrong about somebody?
About Judas.
You know, exactly.
You know, and Jesus said,
what do you think the
scandal
message
will
of that
come.
was? Right.
You know, the millstone around the neck of him for whom it comes, he's thrown into the sea. It will come. But woe to him through whom it comes. Jesus knew that it would come. There would be scandal. It's a human organization as well as a divine organization, right? But what I do is I try to take people into the positive part of the whole thing, you know, that's this book. The Christian, you know, the Catholic contribution to culture, the Catholic contribution to evangelization, you know, all of the great nations around the world that have I think all of the great nations today that have the Christian faith have it because of Catholic missionaries who risked their lives and in many cases died to bring the faith to those countries.
Right, and you say, I thought this was good. In final analysis, it is a matter of reason. Catholics do not assent to the doctrine of transubstantiation because it lifts the soul. They accept it on the strength of John 6 and other biblical passages. So it's not just a burning in our bosom, it's because it's the truth. It's
the truth. You recognize it as the truth and you accept it as such.
And I like what you said at the very end after going through these and making strong statements. You say, that is not to say that Catholics have nothing to learn from the people of other faiths. Many of our separated brethren, exemplary in the way they study the Word of God. Ours as a society is awash in consumerism. The Amish emphasize simplicity. Christian Science places wholesale and wholesome reliance on God's providence. Muslims bear witness to the need for modesty. Jewish insistence on strict observance to the Sabbath. So again, it's not that there aren't good things there and things to be gotten from those situations, but there's a difference between understanding it in that context and seeing things in a syncretistic way. Right?
Oh, we have great respect for what goes on in a lot of other persuasions, religious persuasion. We have a lot to learn. I think one of the reasons people leave the Catholic Church today is because they're not getting good quality Bible study. Right. They're not getting evangelization from their parishes. They're not getting character formation from the pulpit. You know, some of these kinds of things I think we can learn. But the big picture is there's the fullness of the truth in the Catholic faith. And that's what this is book about. It's supposed to secure the faith of the reader against any challenge the world can bring against it. And by the world, I mean the secular media, which is laced with cynicism, academia full of doubt, and the world out there around the water cooler where questions come up that are kind of interesting at times.
Do you have another book in the works? Or?
Another book? Well, I'm working on something called The Atheist Delusion right now. It has to do with Scripture in the Old Testament, defense of the Old Testament against atheist assault, and getting right with Mary. Those are the topics that I'm dealing with right now.
Sounds like two good topics for a bookmark show sometime.
Oh, good things.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be with you.
Me too. Likewise, you do a great job with this book. Speaking here with Dr. Frederick W. Marks, Think and Believe is the title. It's published by Emmaus Road, and of course it's available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Check it out, highly recommended. And thank you for joining us on location at the Catholic Marketing Network. See you next time.